Hello and welcome to another instance of our focus chats. I am Alex Bolboaca. I'm coming to you from the Mozaic Works studios, and today I'd like to talk about a specific topic related to programmers who have some difficulties getting feedback in the beginning because they are very attached to their code. And to help me have this chat and to share some ideas around this topic, I have with me as usual Adi. Welcome, Adi.
Hello, nice to be here as always.
So before we move on, we had quite some activity in the past few weeks, and I think it would be interesting to share just briefly what we've been doing with customers. What have you been doing?
I'm a part in a big organization. I'm part of an agile transformation where I have the role of agile coach. And that means talking with everybody, starting from top management on the strategy of how to have this change, and then implement it with everybody involved. So it's something that will take a while, probably a few good months until we have settled, and yeah, we'll continue and take it from there.
And as usual with big organizations, there's a lot of discussions, a lot of difficulties until you get started and get things moving. So I imagine that's what's happening right now.
Yeah, definitely. There are a lot of things. So from one point, people are eager to start, and from other point, you need to set many things. So yeah, it's always like that. It's a dance. You need to to understand. But yeah, I'm hopeful that things will start soon on the good path.
Yeah, on my side, I've been doing two remote learning programs in our style, in our recent style, which is in this case is 2 sessions every week, 1.5 hours, 2-hour sessions where we discuss the assignments from the previous session, and then we go into some more details about the topic of the day, and then we move on to questions and to the assignment for the next session. And I have two groups. One of them is learning how to do this agile transformation, actually, and that's very interesting because we need to go through a lot of the things that you are doing right now, but done as a learning program instead of working directly with the teams. And the second one is our course that is very sought right now, from developer to architect, how to learn to become an architect as a developer, or at least expand your view on what architecture means. So we've been quite busy, I see.
Yeah, that from developer to architect is especially very interesting, and I think many people benefit from it. It's quite demand, and I think it's always been since we first had it.
Yeah. All right. So now for the topic of the day, it's about how to accept feedback on your code, or the fact that you are not your code. And I started thinking about this since a lot of times as a coach, I notice that programmers tend to get stuck at some point. And my job as a coach is to remove these obstacles, which are often psychological in nature. And one of the first obstacles that I see is that people are very attached to their code. And when you start talking about their code and start showing better ways of structuring their code, they tend to get very defensive, and they tend to be, oh, but it's my code, it's my child, it's you cannot criticize it. And I always have to tell them, look, you are not your code. I can like you as a person, we can go out for a beer, we can have fun together, we can play pool or ping pong or whatever. But when we talk about code, we talk about this thing that you created, sometimes alone, sometimes in a team, and that has to have certain qualities to it. And so it's important to discuss it. Have you noticed this issue with programmers?
Yeah, for sure. I think there has always been this issue, but I think mostly it came very strongly from the past when programmers were very used to working like in their own team in a silo, let's say, very isolated, and then you come and say no, it's not good. Now if you look at programmers who work and are a lot more open to other, let's say, specialists, or they work more with the business or with testers, with, I don't know, business analysts, user experience experts, and so on. I think they're not that they don't have this already because they see the magnitude of whatever is going on. So yeah, I think it exists mostly where you see the programmers working, let's say, alone or just with other programmers.
Yeah, it's a matter of exposure, in fact, because a lot of, and that's a general thing that I've noticed with feedback, it it's harder to accept feedback the first times when you receive feedback, but then it gets easier. But the first times it's often hard, very difficult sometimes.
Yeah, and it feels like a criticism to the person because everything you've done, it's your product, right? So if you criticize my product, you criticize myself personally, and I take offense because, why would you do that?
And indeed, I've noticed this with people who have been used working alone. If you work, for example, on open source projects, is less of a problem because you already faced feedback on your change requests to the source code, and I think it's also because of something that happens in universities where homeworks that at least used to be individual, so you had to work by yourself.
Yes, and it feels like you don't want to share your homework, right? Because it's yours. But then you go to, I don't know which, you get hired, I don't know which organization, and then they say, no, you need to share it. And it's weird. And then someone tells you, no, it's not good. It's even more weird. Why? How would you do that? Yeah, it's difficult to face it. I think also if we come from a society, from a group of people that weren't used to getting feedback, it's even a social issue in a way.
Yeah, and I've noticed this. Sometimes it happens that parents or teachers pump up your expectations, like you are very smart, or you are very, you know everything, you can do anything, and so on. And then you write some code and somebody looks at it and tells you, oh, that's not good. And then your whole world is in danger of going down. And of course, you're...
yeah.
So this is an understandable reaction, right? It's something that you can expect. It's something that's normal.
Yeah, it's normal. It goes to our, I don't know, going back to neuroscience, you go back to your old brain, let's say, which was used to, in a way, assimilates this type of negative feedback with the fact that a bear would attack you, or you go face to face with a lion or with a wolf. So it's the same thing. Your brain says the same thing, and in a way, that's what you said, that it gets better because you get used to it. You say, oh, okay, nobody killed me, the bird didn't kill me, so yeah, it's not that bad.
Yeah, and it's good that you mentioned this, because the general approach to these kind of negative emotions is to first figure out that you have them and understand the trigger to them, and then start separating your reactions from the emotion. And it's harder in the beginning because they are very, very connected. They are kind of like a reflex reaction, but with a little bit of practice you can do that. So what do you think are some ways to cope with this? So let's assume that you are in this situation, right? You have this reaction to people telling you about code, and I guess first question is, why is feedback so useful? Let's start from the benefits.
Feedback for me is a way of learning. You can learn from other person's perspective. You can choose to incorporate that learning. Maybe you think it makes sense in your context, maybe it doesn't, but it is a way of learning. It is a way of improvement. Even if maybe in that context that feedback is not necessarily useful, you may remember it for another context where it might be useful. So that's why I think feedback is very important.
Yeah, and I've learned a lot of things from people looking at my code and telling me, oh, that's not so good. Actually, just like a quick story, one of my first projects was a C++ project, and we were working in a very specific manner. We had a lot of guidelines, we had a lot of books that we read and had to apply a lot of rules, because C++ was difficult and because of the nature of the project, which required performance. And part of the process was that you would write, you would first make the design, and then you would write some code, and you would get feedback first on the design and then on the code. And the feedback was relentless, and it wasn't very pleasant to be in that team. Actually, many people left the team because they couldn't fit within these constraints. But I found it difficult in the beginning, but then I found it as an interesting challenge, and it was really great when I raised up to the challenge, and I was recognized that I was actually doing a good job, even though I was still making mistakes from time to time. So don't get me wrong, we all make mistakes, and I would still make mistakes, but I was able to follow those rules. So that was my first encounter with feedback in the profession, which was both not very pleasant, but also extremely useful. What was your first encounter with feedback in?
As far as I remember, that was a long time ago, because I assimilate code writing with writing, and I have been writing, I don't know, for a long time, since school. So I would write and then ask friends, what about this? So we would then maybe make up something better together. So in a way, I assimilate this with code with writing. But with code, I think that's university about feedback, because we had the chance to have some very good professors who would really look at the code and really say what's good and what's not good about it, not just give out of homework and whatever, give a grade, and that's all.
Yeah, so about now let's move a bit further and talk just briefly about feedback, because let's say you get some feedback and maybe you agree, maybe you don't agree with it. But the first step that's very useful is to actually say, okay, thank you for the feedback. This is something that's very useful. And that doesn't mean that you accept everything that has been said. It doesn't mean that you have to do anything about what has been said. It just means that you have heard the feedback and that you will take it into account. And this is a very simple way of going over the initial hurdle of connecting feedback and actually thinking about feedback as criticism. And I think there are many situations when we discuss with programmers and we see that it kind of get tense. What do you do in those situations?
I always try to remember everyone to think about facts and not make judgments. That's the one thing, because even with feedback, it's very important how the person who says it uses the word, the tone, and so on. So we can talk about the fact that if you start criticizing something, judgmental, so saying this is stupid, this is wrong, this is bad, that's not really feedback, that's judgment. But if you'd say, look, this part of the code is not that performant for this context, so if you change this with this, it will be better. That's a type of actionable feedback. So I try to, if I say, well, when I'm coaching or when I'm with a team, or if I see this type of, let's say, judgmental feedback, I try to go and teach them how to go back on facts rather than be judgmental. And it's true that a lot of, well, technical people tend to be very judgmental. It's not a good thing.
Yeah. So it's very important not to link to a person when you give feedback, and when you receive feedback. Okay, maybe if you are friends with that person and you're kind of playing with your relationship, that's fine. But if generally in a professional relationship, you expect some level of respect. So then you don't go around saying, "Oh, my colleagues are idiots and they are writing the worst code ever."
Yeah. That's not a good idea. That's not acceptable. It's not beneficial for anyone. It's not feedback.
So then some good ways of giving feedback is talking about the qualities of the code, and you mentioned performance, but you can also talk about, I don't understand what this piece of code does, or I don't understand what this name means, or instead of this, how about we use this name from domain, or I find this method very long, how about we try splitting it into smaller methods. And
so it's always an analysis, and then you come with, well, kind of an option or a few options. And quite often it happened to me to read the code and I say, I don't understand this, or could you please explain what this is doing and why you wrote it like that. And after explaining, it made sense, but in the beginning it didn't. So you shouldn't immediately jump to giving feedback. Sometimes it's good to ask questions and after that come up with maybe better ideas.
Yeah, and work together to improve. And there's another thing that you should take into account, that at least part of the way we write code is personal style. And so there are things that are not worth discussing too much. The very common example is, of course, indenting with tabs or spaces. Who cares? Yeah. You should not care about this problem at all. It has absolutely zero effect on the way the code works, and that's the only thing we should worry about, or how the code evolves, and so on. But then there are various other kind of stylistic things. One common thing is some people prefer the, how is it called, the ternary operator, the question mark, and for conditionals. Yes. Yeah, other people prefer if else. I mean, these are roughly interchangeable. If you can understand one, you can understand the other. Some people prefer like this, some people prefer the other way. Fine. I mean, it's not worth.
Yeah, and typically for the compiler, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Most cases.
And it's generally not worth discussing too much about something like this. But something like there's a long method and I don't quite understand what it's doing, that is at least a warning sign that perhaps you, the person who wrote the code, will not understand that function in 6 months.
Yeah, and it's a probable cause of defects, of future defects.
Yeah, so we talked about how you are not your code. You should get emotionally detached from the code. The code is the product of what you're doing. We talked a bit about the causes for this, why it happens, and that it's fairly normal, and that exposure to feedback leads to you getting more detached to it in time. And finally, that of course there are some things worth discussing and some things that are not worth discussing about code. And there are it's definitely not worth discussing about personal, making it personal. It's not that you wrote that awful code, it's more about this code doesn't have the qualities that we are looking for. Anything else that we could tell people who are perhaps starting in programming and are facing this problem?
I would say that you should listen to all feedback and listen to more feedback and get even more feedback. Work with as many people whom you like or you want to learn from, and then start forming your opinion on how to create your own style. I think especially when you're starting, it's important to see many styles, many people, work with many different maybe programming languages, and just to figure it out. And yeah, openness.
That's a good suggestion. So instead of being afraid from what people might say about your code, you can go the other way and openly share code and ask for feedback from people. And you can do that at meetups, in software craft communities, or you can actually search people on the internet that are part of these communities, such as us too, for example, and send us some code samples and ask us, okay, what do you think about this? And then perhaps you can also have a conversation about your code and get some ideas about how to improve.
Even if you start working somewhere, I think that's also a sign about your place of work. If your colleagues give you good feedback and want to help you, that's a good sign that you're in a good place. You're in a place where you can learn, or you're in a place where you can have a good time and also progress with your skills in your career. So it can be something very interesting, very simple to do in a way.
All right. So I think that's it. I think we covered everything that was important about this topic. Of course, there's much more to talk about related to feedback in software development in general, related to what good code is and how to structure it and so on. I advise you, if you haven't, try reading books like Clean Code and Solid Principles and about design patterns, because they give you ideas about how to structure your code. And so I think that's it for our focus chat. Thank you so much, Adi.
Always a pleasure.
Until next time, please, if you have any ideas about what else we can chat about, please let us know. And we have to pay our dues to the YouTube algorithm, so please like, share, subscribe, tell other people about this, comment. And until next time, remember to think, design, and work smart.